Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Coding 101 is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This episode of Coding 101 is brought to you by Casper, an online retailer of premium mattresses for a fraction of the price. Because everyone deserves a great night's sleep. Get $50 off any mattress purchase by visiting casper.com/C101 and enter promo code C101. On this episode of Coding 101, we're breaking into a brand new module. That's right, folks. It's time for Ruby. Hello, and welcome to Coding 101. It's the Twitch show where we let you into the wonderful world of the Code Monkey / Code Warrior. I'm Father Robert Ballecer.
And I'm Lou Maresca.
That's right. He used to be our super special guest co-host, but now he's my co-host. He is the official co-host of Coding 101. Lou, and you're in studio. This is kind of cool.
Yeah, super exciting to be here.
And actually, you're going to come back each and every single week, right?
Wish I had the dough to do that, for sure.
Yeah, no. Unless we develop teleport technology. Now, Lou, we've got a special treat. We've been promising people that we were going to get into some of the more web-based languages. And we definitely have one for this module. We're going to give people a 4-episode module for Ruby and Ruby on Rails, which is the framework in which Ruby can run. I got to tell you, we did pre-record these interviews a while ago, but it's fascinating what you get with Ruby. It's a different way of programming.
Yeah, it's actually a really good language, and it's one of those virtual machine-based languages that can really get you going fast and up and running as soon as you can.
Yeah, exactly, and that's one of the things that I learned early on with Carlos Souza, who's going to be our code warrior, which is the whole idea of the language is it's built for the programmer rather than the machine. Most languages, they feel machine-like. This is really trying to help the programmer.
That's right. Yeah, and I think the one thing that Ruby really is fantastic for is really getting yourself going, from just installing really quickly, downloading something and installing and running right away. So that's one of the things that's really positive for.
Absolutely. But before we get into that, we do have to cover the news. And you've got something interesting. What's this all about? Virtual machines for rescuing web performance?
Yeah. So one of the things that Facebook has had problems for in the past is a lot of their components in their Facebook website is built on PHP. And PHP is not necessarily known for the most performant of platforms that they have. And so what they came up with, they devised a new system. It's called HHVM, which is called the HipHop Virtual Machine. And it's basically a way for them to enhance performance when they do things like server-side type things. It'll basically allow them to code in a language that will then compile down to some kind of a JITted version of that language that then at runtime, the machine can just interpret it a lot faster and actually be a lot more performant.
Right. Now, this is in that vein of languages that try to do just-in-time. So it's not interpreted, but it's not quite compiled.
That's right.
You only compile it when you need it.
That's right.
Which is supposed to give you a nice hybrid mix of performance / usability / functionality.
Right.
So in your experience, what separates a good just-in-time language from one that's just not good at all?
So I think it's the virtual machine. It's really the one that actually can take the IL language, this is the intermediary language that's JITted down to, and then what the virtual machine can do with that. So a lot of them can be platform and specific, platform agnostic. In this case, this one is, and like for instance, C#, it's starting to get there. So a lot of these are like that, but the ones that really can handle different platforms and be able to scale is really the ones that make the JIT the best.
Right. It's interesting that this is for PHP, because PHP is one of these languages that it was very early on in the transition to a web-based programming world, and there's a lot of people who want to kill it. They say PHP should disappear entirely, but it's stubborn because it is installed in so many different code bases, and it is very useful, and I think it's gotten better. We can say that, right? It's gotten better over the years, but one thing that even those who support the language will say is it's not a performance buster. PHP has never been something that you use to optimize. In fact, you want to stay away from PHP to optimize. So with this announcement, is Facebook saying that they think they can keep PHP as long as they use this just-in-time technology?
So this gives them the ability to write code and then that's the whole idea of write code once and be able to reuse it and make it do things that they don't expect it to do. And so that's really what they're doing here. They do write other of the different parts of Facebook in other languages, but again, here it just gives them the ability to reuse what they already have and then slowly move off of it later on.
All right, now let's get down to brass tacks, because people are going to say, okay, that's nice. I've heard this 100 times. Every week it almost feels like every week there's another new pet flavor of something, either a framework or a language that's got a little bit of sugar to make it better from the previous version. Let's talk about performance.
Sure.
Because, and I'll use your experience here, because you live in the .NET world.
Yes.
How does this compare to .NET? And I think, Zach, actually, you've got a chart for this, right?
Yeah, so there's a benchmark. So one thing that we've seen in the past is ASP.NET it's built on top of the .NET framework. We have the CLR, which is the runtime, and then the code behind files are built in either C# or VB or whatever, and you compile those down. But what you can actually see from this chart is you'll see ASP.NET Raw being right around the same as the HipHop Virtual Machine. So you'll actually seeing there's some massive amount of performance gain that you're seeing in there. It's kind of hard to see since there's a lot of frameworks in here. But there's so if you do a quick search of ASP.NET on the page, you'll actually see or just ASP, there's ASP, and then right above it, slowly, if you just do a quick search of HHVM, you'll actually see that it's literally like a couple lines above it. So that's kind of the key, is it's slightly faster in some cases. At the top of the screen, they'll let you switch to different types of, like, for instance, doing queries or data sets or something like that, and you can see the performance comparably. And it will sometimes even outperform ASP.NET. So it's actually showing quite a bit of promise in this whole JITted land of compilation.
Okay, bottom line it for us, who should be using this?
So if you're already if you're already on PHP, you're already using open source, using Apache, that kind of thing, and you're already on PHP, you have a big code base like Facebook, or if not, a little bit smaller than Facebook, obviously, then this is a good alternative for you, because you get the raw performance out of it that you've had before. But if you're starting from new, it all depends if you want to stick with open source, if you want to move over to the Microsoft world, or that kind of thing, and you get the raw performance there automatically. So it's really depending on what the ecosystem you want to be in when you first start out. But if you're already on PHP, this might be a great alternative for you.
Yeah, I think that's mostly the way that I feel, which is, yeah, there are better languages than PHP for many things, but if that's what you're programming in and that's what your code base is in, then this is a viable solution rather than you chucking everything and starting from scratch.
Right.
All right. When we come back, we're going to go ahead and start speaking with Carlos Souza from Code School. He's going to be our guru, taking us through the shadowy realm of Ruby and Ruby on Rails. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about something that's near and dear to my heart. Sleep. No, seriously, sleep. It's all about sleep. Lou, I laugh, and people laugh about this, right? But we all know the statistics. We've all heard the stories, which is you spend, well, maybe a quarter or up to a third of your life sleeping, probably closer to half for me. I do like the sleep. I don't get much, but I do like it. The funny thing is that even though we know what happens when you don't get enough sleep, I mean, you've seen it. You're a supervisor. Yeah. When people don't get enough sleep, they make bad decisions. You end up with really bad performance. I mean, it's those zombie hours, right, where you're sitting there and you're just staring at your screen and you really can't think of anything to do. That's all from sleep deprivation. Yeah. We've seen it. We all know it. But even though we know that you need your sleep, it's amazing that most people still aren't willing to invest in a good mattress, something that will help them get more sleep out of the time they invest in it. That's true. Yeah, you haven't run into that, right? You get a good night's sleep every night?
Right.
Oh, wait, you have kids, so...
I haven't sleep for 5 years straight. I mean.
Okay. No, but that's why we are very happy to welcome to Coding 101, Casper. Now, what is Casper? Casper is a place for you to go online to get a high-quality mattress. Now, there's a few things that you need to know about them. First, they cut out the middleman. Okay, they don't want a showroom. They don't want a salesperson. They want to sell direct to you because what it means is that they can offer you a better product at a lower price. Now, their mattress is obsessively engineered, and it's at a fair price. It includes 2 different technologies, latex and memory foam. Anyone who's had like a memory foam topper knows that it's nice, but you can sink into it and it gets kind of hot. And if you had a latex mattress, you know that it's kind of hard to, it's not so comfortable. Well, you combine the two, and what you get is this perfect blend of comfort and support. Leo Laporte likes it, and you know you will too. Wow, okay, that actually did perform quite well. I've never actually seen that piece of B-roll. I like it. Now, Casper will give you a comfortable mattress that has just the right sink and bounce. Leo got his Casper mattress, and he's never looked back. You can buy it online, completely risk-free. One of the things that I like is that they give you a 100-day return period, so you can actually try it in your room. Now imagine what that means. Most of us, and if we actually put the money into buying a decent mattress, we're going to go to a showroom where you've got 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Maybe if the salesperson is real generous, you can lie down for 5 minutes and say, okay, well, yeah, I want this or I don't want this. Well, that's no test at all. You need to know how you're going to actually sleep in the thing, when you toss, when you turn, when you get up in the middle of the night. That's why Casper will deliver this to your house, where you can try it for over 3 months before deciding whether or not it's right for you. Friends, you gotta try Casper. These mattresses are made in the United States, and I gotta tell you, they're high quality. Now, if you are ready to make the upgrade to good sleep, go ahead and get a Casper mattress. It's $500 for a twin. It's $950 for a king size, which is comparable to industry averages, which means you're going to get an outstanding price because, again, they're cutting out all those middlemen. And you can save an additional $50 as one of our audience members by going to casper.com/C101 and entering the promo code C101. That's casper.com/C101. and the promo code C101. A better sleep awaits. Why aren't you sleeping on a Casper? And we thank Casper for their support of Coding 101. I'm sleepy now.
Let's go.
Let's go. We're done. All right, thanks. No, but seriously, now it's time for us to toss over there to the Sky Desk, where we're going to have a nice little chat with our code warrior, Carlos Souza. Welcome to the first of our Ruby programming modules. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, tossing from Father Robert Ballecer. Yeah, it's one of those time-space continuum things. And we have joining us a programmer, a developer who was actually one of our wildcard episodes not too long ago, Mr. Carlos Souza, who is a developer and a teacher for Code School. Carlos, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Carlos, we brought you here because you are an expert in Ruby, and we've been wanting to take a look at Ruby and Rails for quite a while. You're going to bring us into it. You're going to give us sort of that first taste to see if maybe this is the programming language that they need. So let me start off by asking, and we covered this a little bit in the wildcard episode, why would people want to do Ruby? What do you think is the draw for the language?
So Ruby is one of the very few languages, if not the only language that was built thinking of the programmers writing the code rather than the machines that will run the programs. So it's a very expressive language. I want to say it's an intuitive language and extremely powerful, extremely rich. And again, it's a pleasure to work with. So.
Well, let's jump right in and give people an actual coding example. Give me a concept that you can program on screen to show people why it was designed for the programmers rather than the machine.
Right, okay. So I already have Ruby installed in my machine. If you want to install Ruby, it's not super hard. You can go to the website and follow the instructions. More specifically, if you are in a Windows platform, you might want to check out the Ruby installer. This is probably the easiest way to install Ruby on Windows. But I'm not going to go through the installation process. I'm just going to assume that you have something running. And the first cool thing about Ruby, let me just go ahead and close this. So as you can see, I'm here on the terminal, also known as the command line. Right, this is where we run all of our lower level commands in the computer. So if I want to list my files, ls, and you can see I have one file here. But before we dive into this file, I want to show you something called interactive Ruby, the Ruby console, which you fire up using the command IRB. So IRB gives us a Ruby prompt, so we can actually write Ruby code that's immediately evaluated and outputs to the terminal. So if we say something 1 + 2 is going to output the result of that, of this very simple mathematical calculation.
Very nice. Also, the last time we saw something like this was when we went through our Perl module. It's sort of a real-time environment for us to evaluate lines of code as we go.
Yes, exactly. So Perl has that. Python is another very popular language that has that same interactive console. And Ruby is no different. And it's probably the easiest way to try out Ruby on your local environment. And I use this a lot to just experiment with different things before I actually write them in my program. So this is one of the coolest things that you can be aware of when you're starting out with Ruby.
Carlos, let me clear something else up really quickly, because again, you mentioned this during the interview. There are IDEs for Ruby and for Rails. You can download very nice graphical frameworks that will check your work as you go, but you're one of these programmers that you provide not to have any of the training wheels. You compile your code and you let it go, right?
Right. Yeah, I just use a very simple text editor. Since you mentioned compilation, there's no such thing. That step is not something we developers have to do in Ruby because it's a dynamic language. It's not a compiled language, so we don't have to run any compiler and then generate the binary and then run that code. We just run a Ruby script, and then the Ruby command parses the source code and then just outputs the result.
Right, that's the strength of the language. All right, keep going. So I'm sorry to interrupt your demonstration here, but let us see the magic.
Sure. So you can output command using puts, and puts is the same thing as print or echo in other languages. So hello everybody. And it's going to return the result here at the bottom, as you can see. So this is kind of like the easiest way to get up to speed. Just kind of like try out the language. And because we're going to be writing a little bit more code, I'm just going to jump into a file and write something in that file. So let me just go ahead and clear this out, script, and then we're going to start with a blank slate. So like you mentioned, I use Vim, which is it's a text editor that's been around for a long time. It's not, I don't want to say it's super easy to use, but it's very lightweight and doesn't offer any of the benefits of the IDE. So maybe because of that reason, it tends to be faster because, again, it's just a text editor. But we do have IDEs for Ruby and for Rails out there, multiple alternatives. And
Right.
I'm just going to create a file called script.rb. And then inside of that file, I'm going to start doing the same command that we run. So hello world, right? The typical first program that everybody writes. So I'm going to save that file and then run the script with the Ruby command, right? So if you run that, you can see the result is printed on the screen. So that is sort of our first introduction to Ruby, right?
Very nice. And that's the first command that they know. That's the one that will allow you to push to the screen.
Right, exactly. So let's now work with variable assignments. So let's say that we have a message that says, hello, my name is, and what we want to do here is add a touch of dynamic to this code, right? So we don't want to hard code the name in here. Let's use a variable to replace that name. So we're going to do something called a string interpolation. So in the middle of that string, we're going to pull the value from another variable and replace it with this. So I'm just going to call it name for now.
Nice.
And then above here, we can say name Carlos.
And of course, the people who have been watching Coding 101 for a while will notice that you're not assigning types to your variables because that's not how Ruby works. You've got dynamic type assignment.
Exactly. Very, very cool that you brought this up. I am definitely not determining the type because, like you said, it's dynamic typing, and Ruby does something that's called type inference. So when you assign a value to a variable, it determines the type of that variable, and in runtime, it gives that value its type, right? So if we do now puts message and run this code, hello, my name is Carlos. And I can go back and change this to something else. Run this again, and then it'll replace with that name. So this is a feature that's called string interpolation. So again, we're writing a string, and in the middle of that string, we have a placeholder that calls out to a variable that was assigned one step above here, right?
I'm really starting to see where your statement comes that this was designed for programmers. This is a much easier way to consider how you would concatenate strings and how you would use variables inside of a language that doesn't really consider the computer. It considers the programmer. I love this. This is nice.
Right. Yeah, and we're just getting started. Let's go ahead and write a function, right, or a method. So the way that you do that in Ruby, you declare methods with the keyword def, right? So def, and then you give it a method name. So let's just call this print message. And print message is going to receive one argument, which is going to be the name, right? A name of a person. So we're going to move this inside of here, and we can kill this. So we've defined a method that takes one argument, name, and uses that argument to build a string, assigns that string to the variable message. And one thing that we don't have to do in Ruby, and we have to do in a lot of other languages, is to return a value. But the thing is, Ruby assumes that the last expression in your method will be the return value for that method. So we don't have to do this, and we also don't have to do this. This is all we have to do inside of our method so that it returns the message with the name. So instead of puts message, I'm going to put puts print message, and I'm going to say Carlos. And then, I'm going to run this, and you can see it ran our function with our argument. So if you go back and call something else,
that's just the value that you're passing to the method.
Exactly. So now, because we've wrapped our little string interpolation inside of a method, we can simply call that method from wherever we want the message to be printed. So we can sort of like reuse that same logic from different places.
So this data inference, type inference, in this case, it's inferring what's the return. This is a theme through Ruby, right? I mean, it seems intelligent enough where it just kind of figures out what it is you're trying to pass or what it is you're trying to return. Exactly.
And you notice I'm not on the method definition. I'm just simply saying there's going to be one argument. I'm not saying what type of argument that is going to be. Right.
Something is inbound, and I want you to take that something that's inbound and put it with this string.
Yes. Wow. Exactly. That is what's happening.
Very nice. Okay. I see that. So, now, this is nice. So this inference theme in Ruby is definitely something that's going to be good for a programmer. But of course, we're going to have to go through some of the standard pieces that we need for any programming language, like symbols, like loops, like blocks, like classes. Do those change much from what you might see in, say, C#?
The concept doesn't change much, but the syntax does. So in Ruby, we do have objects, we do have classes. In C#, we do have objects, we do have classes. But the way that we write them and to some extent, the way that they behave are a little different in Ruby than in other languages.
Let's take a look.
Yeah, let's take a look. So if we wanted, for example, to give a little bit more information about the person, perhaps we want to say the location that person is from, right? So let's go ahead and instead of passing the name, we're going to pass a person. And here, we're going to say person name, and I'm from person location. Right?
Got it.
So the message will be, hello, my name is the name, and then I'm from a given location. So how do we do that? Let's build a person class, and that's how you build a class in Ruby. And we're going to use a constructor to set the name and the location for that person. And in other languages, I'm not exactly sure in C#, but I know in Java, the constructor is named after the class. But in Ruby, all the constructors are called initialize. And the constructor is the method that gets called when you instantiate an object from that class. This is object orientation. This works across all OO languages. It's not any different in Ruby.
Right.
And we're going to initialize with a name and a location. Now, I'm going to use these two arguments and store them inside of an instance variable. And the way that instance variables look in Ruby is our variables prepended with the @ sign. So in this case, name and location. So because we've assigned them to instance variables, we can now read from those instance variables. But we still need to, if we try reading them now, so let me go ahead and intentionally force this error. So let's create two people here. Let's create Carlos.
We've got Strengths in the chat room right now who's asking a very basic question. He's wondering if case sensitivity matters in Ruby, yes?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Ruby's a case-sensitive language. You're in San Francisco, is that right?
Oh, yes, I am.
All right. So now we're going to send Carlos and Robert as arguments. Now, if we try to run this code now, it's saying undefined method name for person. So let's go back and see what happens. So we try calling name here from our object, but this name method doesn't exist. So we have to create a name method in our person class.
Oh, okay.
The name method is nothing but a getter. And what a getter is a function or a method that simply returns a value that's stored inside of that object. So one way to do that would be to create a method called name and return name. And then the same thing with location.
Nice.
So this is the one way to do it. Now, if we run this code, you can see my name's Carlos, I'm from Rio, my name's Robert, I'm from San Francisco. But in Ruby, there's a shorter way to do that. We can write something called attribute reader and say name and location. Run this code again, and it'll behave the same.
How did that work? So how were you able to shorten all of that, creating those two methods within this class, down to just using the reader?
Right. Again, because Ruby is a language that thinks about the program that it's writing, and they try to give you all the tools that you need to write good and clean code. And this is called encapsulation, right? Because we want to be able to hide as much as possible and only expose to the developers what they need to know. Because this is a common pattern in object orientation to expose getters, they give you, and they is the Ruby language, gives you a shortcut to create getters, which is this class method called attribute reader that takes two arguments, two symbols. And this is a symbol in Ruby, which is basically a string that always points to the same reference in the machine, same memory address in the machine. It's sort of a lower level optimization, because when you create two strings in Ruby or pretty much any other language, so name and name, so line 5 and line 7, although they look the same, they are two different objects and they point to two different memory addresses in the machine. But if we use a symbol, these two are exactly the same and they point to the same memory address in the system. And Ruby utilizes that to reduce the memory footprint that it needs to run. So whenever possible, we use symbols instead of strings. And this is one of those scenarios. So we call the attribute reader, and this is nothing but a method, right? Because we can omit parens, we can omit certain things in Ruby. So yeah, it would be the same thing if we call this with parens. So if we run this, it's going to still run the same. Or if we omit this, we can also omit this. So we don't need these or these. Or these. Actually, we might need the last ones. Let's see.
We've got a question from a member of the audience who is more used to C#, and he's wondering how this is handling the instantiation. I mean, I see where the class is defined. I see where the I guess the symbols inside those class are defined. But where do I actually instantiate the class here?
Right here, when you call .new.
Nice.
Yep, so you call .new on a class, and that creates an object that we're assigning to Carlos here, and then to Robert here on line 16. So, yep.
This was a huge chunk of what we went over in the C# module. Thank you very much.
Yep, absolutely. So you see we didn't need to compile anything. It was simply ran the Ruby script, and he parsed it all, and it generated this code. Now let's go ahead and just say, let's extract this print message to the person object itself. So let's just say greet, right? And this greet is going to be this message here. And instead of calling person.name, we can actually reference the instance variable from this person. So we don't need the print message anymore. And instead of saying print message, we're going to say greet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we actually don't need the attribute readers anymore.
Look, you keep adding code and taking it away, and our audience is going, wait a minute, what do I actually have to write?
Am I going too fast or?
No. It's perfect.
Okay.
I mean, they're kind of amazed. They're saying this is actually how most people would actually think about doing this, but they're accustomed to having to work around what the IDE does.
Right. And again, like the last step that I just did, the attribute reader, I could pretty much just leave this here and it would still work.
It's just you don't need it. I mean, you can have it there.
Exactly. We don't need this. So what we want to do is we want to write code that's easy for someone else to read and understand. So if someone else reads this code as is and notices there's this line here declaring two getters, they will assume that these getters are being used somewhere, right? But if they're not, then you're misleading whoever's writing this code. So you're much better off not using it at all.
This is probably the language that requires the least amount of commenting. I would still comment everything, but it's so clean. It's so concise. You can just follow it and go, okay, I see what's happening here. I would say, and there's where we have the puts.
Yep. And another nice thing we can do too, we can do this assignment in the same line. So.
Okay. Another simple question. How does white space work inside of Ruby?
Most times it doesn't really matter. So I can put as many spaces as I want here, and it's not going to matter. So it doesn't have to. It's not white space sensitive like Python is. Indentation and all that stuff. Not at all. So. Yeah, now this is a personal preference. This is valid Ruby code, but for method definitions, my personal preference is to always use parens.
Just for consistency.
Just for consistency.
You don't have to.
We don't have to, no. Okay. And again, it's just my personal preference, but it's interesting that you mentioned consistency because I think when it comes to participating in a project with others, consistency should be more important than personal preference. So what that means is if you join an existing project that follows a certain pattern, you should follow that pattern even if it's not of your liking.
Right. I was just going to ask you about that. If you're working on a dev team with Ruby, because there are so many different ways you can do the same thing, it sounds like you would have to have at least opportune team meetings to say, well, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're breaking out methods. This is how we're doing classes. These are what we'll expect to see in your code so that we do have that consistency across the project. Do you find that more important in Ruby than other languages that might be a bit more strict with how you program?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a very important part of working in a team, having everybody agreeing, and you can do that either through in-person meetings where everybody discusses and talks about those conventions, or you can have a document that specifies the code conventions for your company or for your project.
Right.
And I'm not sure about Ruby, but I know there are other languages. When I work with Java, for example, I know it was part of the build system to run a sort of a code audit that would check for those specific things. Because again, in Java, for example, although it's a more strict language, it can still do things in different ways. And what this tool would do during build time was to make sure that you were doing things in the way that the project, following the project's convention. So there might be something out there for Ruby that does this automatically as well, which is another way to enforce project conventions. So.
Carlos, we are starting to run close to the edge of time for this particular episode, but I'd really like to see how Ruby handles loops.
Loops, yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. So here we have two people, right? Carlos and Robert. Instead of repeating puts for these two people, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array. First, I'm going to create an array called people. And I'm going to assign Carlos and Robert. And this is how you create an array in Ruby. I'm not creating an array object manually. I'm literally just using the angle bracket, the brackets here, using two elements, assigning to people, and Ruby knows this is an array. And I'm going to say that people each do person, and this is a loop in Ruby.
That's a loop?
Yes, it's a loop, and is using what it's called an internal iterator. And then you can say person.greet. And then if we do this now, it's going to print our messages for us. This is the Ruby way to do it.
Wait. How's that working? Where do I get the parameters for my loop?
Exactly. This is the parameter for each person. So what Ruby is doing is, again, this is an array, right? So if you do people class, you can see it's an array.
Of course, okay.
Right? And the array has a method called each, which is what we're calling here. And this method takes one argument. And the argument to the each method is a block. This is a block in Ruby.
Nice.
And a block is sort of it's sort of a lambda, right? It's for those that are familiar with JavaScript, it's almost as if we're passing an anonymous function, right? Which might make more sense for the JavaScript developers. So we're passing a block, and this block takes one argument, and inside of that block, we're calling the greet method on the argument that's passed to the block. So this is what's happening behind the scenes. Now, another way to write this, which might make more sense, is let's call this person block and assign the lambda that I was talking about. So we can do person puts person.greet, right? So now, instead of passing a block like that, I'm going to pass the block as the argument. Right, so think of this as an anonymous function in JavaScript, right? Mm-hmm. So if I pass that, that still works.
Wow.
Right, and this is what's called an internal iterator. We're giving the collection, in this case the array, an iterator, something that needs to be done for each element, and we're letting it up to the array to know how to loop through those elements.
So basically, when you hand it the block, it's smart enough, again, this is a theme in Ruby, to know that you're going to want to run through the entire array.
Yes, it's going to run whatever is inside of the lambda for each element of the array.
We've got Web6054 in the chat room who's getting a little lost on Lambda. Why do they call it Lambda? What exactly does Lambda define?
Lambda is almost like an anonymous function. Pretty much. So so the code in here doesn't get executed right away, right? If we simply had puts whatever person dot greet, something like that, or even it puts oh hi, right? If we did this over here, this method would be executed as soon as line 19 was interpreted. But when we wrap something inside of a lambda, what we're saying is don't run this code just yet.
Right. Get the whole thing first.
Yes. So yeah, get this code, store it in this variable, and send it to someone else. That someone else will know when they need to run this code. When that someone else determines that this code needs to be run, they're going to run this code. So basically, they're going to call the .call function, right? So let me give you another example here. If we simply have this and run this code, it's not going to run, right? We didn't put anything. Let me remove this. But if we did, I think it's call. If we did this, then our code is run, right?
Nice.
So
we've got people right now whose eyes are glazing over. To those people, I'd say, don't worry, because remember, this episode will be available on the download. All of this code, all of these examples will be available in the GitHub that we're setting up for this particular module. So you can move through it at your own pace as many times as you need to understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we move on, I'd just like to show the more typical way of iterating through an object, which is using the external iterator, right? And again, the JavaScript developers in the room might be familiar with. So we'll do a for person in people.
That's something, yeah. Our audience they know what that looks like.
Yeah. So puts person and p inputs are the same thing. I think it's for in. So let me go ahead and just comment this. So for person and people do, yeah, let's try that. Yeah, you see that?
There we go, yeah.
So that's the more typical way of doing it, but it's not what we call idiomatic Ruby. It's not the type of Ruby that's written by Rubyists.
This is from a Ruby tourist, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
From someone new to Ruby or just visiting.
But I'd say we'll make sure that snippet ends in there, because the people that we have coming from different languages are probably more comfortable with that. They can try that a few times because it will work, and then they can move to something that is more native Ruby.
Exactly. Yep. And one last thing I want to show, if we have time, is what's called open classes. Let me go ahead and just comment everything in here. Comment this. All right. My thing is not working. Nope.
Wait.
Nope. Nope.
Oh, that's kind of like a comment.
Nope. One last try.
It was working just a few seconds ago.
All right. We'll get back to it. Let me just delete it for now, and we'll leave that snippet in there. All right. So you see that we declared our person class up here.
Right.
Right? And then we created objects from that class.
Mm-hmm.
Now what I want to do is I want to add another method to this class. And Ruby is so flexible that it allows us to reopen existing classes and add things to those classes. So one example is if I reopen the person class, I can just declare another person class, but since we already created one, it's going to reutilize that class and say goodbye. Right? We can have the say goodbye method and say I am going back to location.
So this is just assuming that you're going to take everything that was in the previously designed class and use it now in addition to this.
Yes.
Why would I do this? Why wouldn't I just go back up to the original class?
I'm going to show you why in a minute.
Okay.
So if we now do Carlos say goodbye and Robert say goodbye, right? So we're calling the methods that were defined when we reopen the class, right? And if we run the script, oops, did I forget to say something? Yeah, I forgot to put
There we go.
a little echo. All right, so I'm going back to Rio, I'm going back to San Francisco now. And you might ask, why would you want to do that, right? I mean, I have access to the person class. I created the person class. Why not just stick it in here? Here's the thing. You can also do this with the classes that are built in Ruby.
Oh. Okay, now that makes sense.
Right?
Nice.
So let's go ahead and just do something with, okay, let's do this. Let's have, let's give a year, right? For example, the year that I was born, 1984, and say print age, right? So this is something that I just want to create right now, right? If we call print age, we don't have this in Ruby.
Right.
So age puts age, right? If we do, if we run this code, it's going to blow up and say there's undefined method called print age for this, which is the type fixed num. So the first thing we do here is, fixed num is the class. So let me go ahead and reopen the fixed num class, define a print age method, and say, let's do this minus self. And then self is the actual value here. So 1984, right?
Right.
So if we go back and run this, it's going to give us my age. So notice here, we reopened an existing Ruby class, defined a custom method, and call that custom method on one of Ruby's primitives, right? And this is what allows, for example, Rails to do stuff like 1 day ago, right? And this will print out literally the date of yesterday, right? Or 10 weeks ago. This is valid Rails code, right? You can do stuff like that. And I can actually show you where Rails does that. If we go to Rails.
Actually, we've got a good question from both Roscoe and from Dale Poco in the chat room, and they're wondering about replacing an existing method inside of a class.
Right, that is bad.
It's very bad.
It's still possible. Rails gives you that flexibility, and you can still shoot yourself in the foot. That's why it's not good to modify existing methods. And there's also arguments that say it's not good to add to existing classes, but this is basically how Rails was built on, right? But the only reason that they do that Rails does that, is when it makes sense and when it makes your code more intuitive and more expressive, right? And this is called monkey patching, by the way. It's the name of this practice of reopening existing classes and adding functionality in there. If we do core extensions here and go to time, no, let's do a numeric time. I'm gonna make my code a little bit bigger and easier to read here. So yep, you can see one example here. So what Rails did was literally open the class numeric, which is a built-in class from Ruby's standard library, and it added its own methods. So it declared the method seconds, right? And then that's the implementation. And then it added a bunch of other methods. So in Rails, not in Ruby, but in Rails, you can call 2.minutes and it'll give you how many seconds that is. And many other utility methods that, again, make your code easier to understand.
Okay.
So just try to think for a minute, how much code if you're not writing Ruby or working with Rails in other languages, you would have to write to determine the date from, say, 2 weeks ago, right? You would likely have to do some math, right? Or the code for 2 weeks from now, right? You would probably have to, times how many minutes in a day, times how many days in a week, time how many weeks in a month kind of thing. In Rails, you can simply do $1.month from now.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yep.
Carlos, I'm afraid we are at the end of our time for this particular episode, but we're coming back next week, and we're actually going beyond Ruby. What will we be doing?
We are going to be writing our first Rails application, hopefully using some of the stuff that we learned here and just kind of exploring the different parts of Rails and what Rails gives us out of the box to make us extremely productive web developers.
Right. And we're going to be going back to the studio in just a bit. But before we do that, don't forget that all of this code, everything that Carlos just did, will be available in the show notes, along with homework. Carlos, what homework are you going to give to the folks at home?
Homework for the folks at home. With everything that we learned here, I want to see if, especially with this monkey patching thing, I want to see if people can implement the following code. So basically what's on my screen here, can you see this? So I want people to implement this. 2 human number. And what this needs to print out is 1. And then 2 human number needs to print out 2. So I want to see if people can implement this from 1 to 10. That's it. Simple stuff.
Simple stuff, but it's going to take a while. Folks, don't forget that you can also find Carlos at Code School. And Carlos, could you please tell the folks at home what Code School is, why you're at Code School, and where they can find all of your work?
Absolutely. Code School is an online platform for learning web technologies. All of our courses, the majority of our courses, are in the browser. What this means that you don't have to install anything in your computer to try out a different language. So you can see here, I'm on the Ruby path, and we have all of these courses just on Ruby. And these here are about Rails, how to build Rails applications, how to build APIs in Rails, how to test in Rails, how to use testing frameworks, and we have a bunch of other technologies as well. We have stuff on JavaScript, HTML, CSS, iOS. So if you're on a Windows machine running Internet Explorer, you can still see how it feels to develop iOS applications. So this is Code School. You can sign up for free, start taking some of our courses. About 30% of all of our content is free. But if you want access to everything, you pay $29 a month, and that gets you access to every single thing that we have. All of our courses and also all of our screencasts. So we have screencasts that follow up to our existing courses, and we also have other video series that dive into different things. So we cover existing apps. We try to replicate some of those apps functionalities. We go on and we meet with people in the industry. We have a video series with David Heinemeier Hansen, which is the creator of Ruby on Rails, where we talk a little bit about their approach using Rails for their for Basecamp, which is the business that originated Rails, and a bunch of other cool stuff on Groupon, Threadless, and yep, that's basically what Code School is in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Again, Carlos Souza from Code School, thank you so very much for the knowledge. We'll have you back next week. We're going to be diving into some Rails, but right now it's back to you, Lou and Padre, at the coding desk.
You know, Lou, what I liked about that is Carlos really brought out a lot of the programmer-friendly features of Ruby. This idea that it has internal iterators, the idea that it does this smart dynamic typing, which we've seen before, right, but that it just figures out what kind of data you're trying to push, and it will automatically set the types. And I like that. I've seen some of that in C#, but I haven't played with many web-ready, web-centric languages that do the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the advantages of Ruby is it can actually get you going, and it'll handle what types and type-specific things that you're doing, and then be able to determine at runtime, even at compilation time, what you're doing.
Right, and again, this kind of feeds into what we talked about at the beginning of the show, the ability to compile things, to make things in time as they come up, is really, I think, where we're heading. And Ruby is a very nice example of that.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, next week, we're going to be bringing Mr. Souza back. He's going to be showing us not just Ruby, but Rails. That's right. You've probably heard about this. They go hand in hand. You can program in just Ruby, but that's kind of like running a race with 3 wheels. You should have the full set, which means it's time for Ruby on Rails. Now, don't forget, we know that this is a lot of information, but we're going to give you all the assets. Mr. Souza has given us his notes so that we can make sure you get them so you don't have to copy off the screen. All you got to do is go to our show page at twit.tv/code, Coding 101. It all goes to the same place. And you'll be able to download those notes either from our GitHub or from a zip file, depending on how we make this work. We're still trying to figure out why things don't work sometimes. It's weird like that. Don't forget that you can reach us online, socially. In fact, I think the best place socially, well, I mean, not for like a drink or anything, but the best place to find us is on Twitter. Lou, where are you found?
At LouMM, LOUMM, and feel free to ping me anytime.
Yeah, and it's not just the show you work on. I mean, you actually do work for Microsoft.
That's right.
You are one of their lead developers. You run their teams, you're a manager. And you also work, your main project is CRM, correct?
That's right, yeah. CRM, to find all my work at crm.dynamics.com.
Yeah, so if you want his help with CRM, and actually Jeff Needles here in the studio really wanted his help, we said no. Make sure you find him on Twitter. You can find me at twitter.com/PadreSJ. That's at PadreSJ. If you follow me, you'll find out who we're going to be speaking to each week, the topics that we'll be covering, and you'll actually be able to suggest guests for future episodes. In fact, Carlos Souza was suggested by you on Twitter. So if you've got a favorite programmer that you want to either see helping us program or see in one of our wildcard episodes, make sure you tell us on Twitter. You can also find us on G+. You're in that group, right?
Oh,
You're a moderator.
Yeah. I'd love to be in there, actually.
Yeah, it's filled with smart people, and the nice thing about that group is you've got beginning programmers and you've got expert programmers and everyone in between, and people just help each other. Trust me, if you have a question, even if you think it's stupid, ask it in that group. Just go to G+, look for Coding 101. It's a great place to get the support of your fellow programmer.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also, don't forget that we do this show live, or most of the time live, on Mondays, 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. Just go to live.twit.tv. If you check out the live feed, you can see what we do before the show and after the show and everything that goes in between. And you can also jump into our chat room at irc.twit.tv. Lou, I think that's about it, right? Shall we wrap this one up?
Let's wrap it up.
Okay. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer.
And I'm Lou Maresca.
And this has been Coding 101, End of Line.